All right. So today we're going to have a chat about how to engage your senior leaders to become cultural storytellers. And I'll introduce myself in a little bit, but I want to start with a story. And here's a code that you could scan right now or go to this link. And there's a storyteller type quiz that you can take there, which tells you which of 6 storyteller types you are. So if you want to go there, you can go there now. We'll have a minute later to do this as well. But as we're waiting for people to get in, you can do this. So let me then start with a story. One brick at a time is a cultural value at one of the companies where I was chief product officer. And the story behind this cultural value is this. One of our advisors there, let's call him David. David is part of the Army when he was young, and there are a lot of training that you have to suffer through in the Army. One day, his lieutenant told his troop that they had to build a retaining wall. And he thought, well, it's fine if today is a cool fall day and we're building a wall. But in fact, it was a t-shirt stuck to the skin, mosquitoes everywhere, sweating bullets type of day. And if you're building a brick wall on such a day, it's not going to be extremely pleasant. So he was thinking, well, there's only one way to get through this. And he had to repeat to himself over and over again, just one brick at a time. You know, every mosquito biting him, just one brick at a time. Every sweat beating down his face, just one brick at a time, one more brick. At the end of the day, his whole troop stepped back and saw this beautiful wall that they built. And they felt so proud that they could do this all together on such a terrible day. And he had to remember this one brick at a time. So he told us this story, which is to motivate us because we were in a company that was experiencing constant change. And he said, when you're in such a situation, you're going to feel every day like mosquitoes are biting you and you're sweating bullets and it's extremely uncomfortable. But you just have to remember that one brick at a time is how you'll get there. And if you do this, it's not going to feel good in the moment, but at the end, you'll see all of your accomplishments laid out there right in front of you. So we took this value into our company, and it's been a really great experience for all of us as a bonding experience. In fact, we have an actual brick wall that we built over time. And all the little bricks you see there is laid on different dates. You can see the date on the brick. On the other side of that brick is the accomplishment that we as a company made. So it could be an employee joining. It could be a customer that we signed. It could be funding rounds that we made. And we would slowly lay it one brick at a time. It's all laid there for the company to see. It was an extremely motivating and an important reminder for everybody in the company of how we go about making it as a company. It was very important in our company that every single manager, from CEO all the way down, not only learn the story of our culture, and this is one of the points of our culture, but also remember the stories that drive those cultural elements and, of course, live the story, right? So you see an example in the picture of us living that story, but to retell the story over and over again for every person joining and to retell it as we go is the most important builder of good culture. So the question is, how do you go about doing this? What is necessary to enable your senior leaders, not just your CEO or and yourself maybe in a kind of cultural leadership position, someone who isn't titled to be a cultural leader. Everyone's a cultural leader, right? So how can you motivate your senior leaders to help with this cultural storytelling? Well, they need tools. Ultimately, your senior leader needs to have tools and a forum through which they can properly tell the story. And while every human is born a storyteller, not everyone is comfortable or have the tools necessary to tell stories. So I teach a 6 stories framework in my 6-week class with leaders. And the 6 stories framework help leaders create stories that resonate. Because ultimately, only stories that resonate with the audience are going to be stories that stick. How did I come up with this framework? I've spent 17 years in product management, where the role is very much about storytelling with engineering, with design, with sales, with executive teams, with customers, with investors. It's rallying people to share a product vision, a company vision. It's bringing people on board to build and execute and deliver products. So in my time in this role, I've launched over 20 products, delivered thousands of stories in order to enable my work. And that's how I came to create this framework, which is the 6 stories framework, because I've discovered that a lot of product leaders, but also general leaders, lack the structure to create these stories. And within this stories framework, which I'll share a little bit and give an intro about today, is 6 different types of storytellers. These storytellers are spread across the emotional spectrum. So let's quickly find out what your storyteller type is first. And then I'm going to share a little bit more about the 6 different types of storytellers. Thanks for sharing the link, Artem, in the chat. And once you take this quiz, which should take only about 2 minutes, if you could share your, I'm clicking on the chat. If you could share your type in the chat directly. I don't know if you're able to set up a poll, Artem. If you are, you can create a poll that has the 6 different types that's in the next slide. If not, people can just type their answer. Once you do this Storyteller Type quiz, it'll tell you which type you are. You also get an email about the type and the description about it. You can just remember the name and cut and paste it into chat so people can see who we have in the room today. All right, I'll give us another 30 seconds here to do this quiz. And yes, it is in English, not in Russian. I just realized that maybe we should have translated it, but that's okay. You can use a translator online or take your time and do it. And then go ahead and put your, there you go, Google Translate. Maybe we'll just give folks another 30 seconds because of the translation. And you can certainly do this after the fact as well and find out which storyteller type you are. All right. Are they able to put their answer in the chat already or only in the questions area? Everyone should be able to type in chat, right? Okay. Great. All right. As you take the quiz, you can go ahead and type. Once I get, maybe one person can, everyone can type their answer, but if one person types it, then I know at least folks are able to finish the quiz. So we can just put one, waiting for one person to figure out the quiz and give us an answer here. Okay. There is visionary. Okay. Very good. We have sage, visionary. Great. All right. So what are these names? There are 6 different, I'm unable to advance. Here we go. There are 6 different types of storytellers. From the very animated and passionate evangelist, which is on the emotional end of the spectrum, to the very logical professor. And these different storytellers present differently. They connect with different audiences. And so in your senior leaders, you might see all these different types, and you'll find that they have different following, right? So to activate all of them, to tell the best story and to be able to connect with the audience that they have, you need to give them the tools so that they know how to activate the storyteller type that they have. But also, if they're speaking to an audience outside their type of storyteller, that they're able then to stretch into that type of communication style and be able to connect with them. So by understanding which type of storyteller type you are, then you can better connect with people who are both the same as well as different than your storyteller type. And this is one of the many tools that we use in order to help leaders become better storytellers and become more confident storytellers. So they have a framework for understanding how they can go about doing this. So rather than describe each one, I'm going to demonstrate to you a couple of examples. So I'm going to do evangelist, and then I'm going to do visionary as well. And evangelist and sage you actually already heard, which is the story that I told earlier about David. That's what a sage would talk about when they talk about the story of one brick at a time. But I'm going to change it up now, and I'm going to do the same. Like imagine I was the CEO giving a talk at the all hands, all staff in the company. And I'm talking about the cultural value of one brick at a time. If I was trying to appeal to evangelists, or if I was myself an evangelist, what is the way that I would do it? And then I would also do it as a visionary as well to contrast it. All right. So let's do evangelist first. Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling that you can't slow down because the competition is biting at our heels? Well, you'd be right. They are biting at our heels, and I feel this way every single day that I wake up. Until I adopted one of our cultural values into my mantra. One brick at a time. I remind myself every day that I wake up feeling overwhelmed. I remind myself one brick at a time. What does that mean? One brick is one item that I did today. One customer phone call, one personal brick. One important email, one personal brick. Giving a talk at this all hands, one personal brick. Signing a customer deal, one company brick. One brick at a time. That's how we'll build this together, guys. Just remember, if you're feeling overwhelmed, just remember, remind yourself, one brick at a time. You cannot build Rome in one day. You cannot build a great business in one day. This is why we have this cultural value. So use it and remember one brick at a time. That's how an evangelist would share the story. Now, here's the contrast. Let's look at how a visionary might share this company value. And this company that I was part of had a health product that saved lives. So that's what the connection is here when I talk about saving lives. Okay, here we go, visionary. Today, we saved 3 lives. But in 3 years, we're going to save 3,000 lives. You don't believe me? I believe. I believe we will do this. I believe you. You see, Rome wasn't built in a day. The Burj Khalifa wasn't built in a day. And the Great Wall wasn't built in a day. But they were built, all of them were built one brick at a time. So if You lay a brick, and I lay a brick. Then he lays a brick, and she lays a brick. And suddenly, we will be saving not 3,000 lives, but 300,000 lives and 3 million lives. And how do we do this? We will do this one brick at a time. So can you see how they're different? The appeal is very different. The appeal of the evangelist is more about the emotion, more about the connecting with the audience on how they're feeling. Whereas the sage is about a story of a sage, of somebody who's been through this before and how they go about tackling this challenge that they have in front of them. Whereas visionary is much more about where are we going? What is this quest that we're on? And how do we get there as a team, right? They're very different in how they present the story. But at the end of the day, it's still talking about one brick at a time, right? It's still talking about that cultural value. But you'll find that each of these stories relate to people differently. And some will resonate and some will not. And so being able to flex between the different stories is really important. Yeah, Artem is sharing, and feel free to jump in here. What you see is a difference between the different styles. Yeah, Artem saying the other goes in the vision of the future. Exactly, you got it, right? The visionary is about the future. The evangelist is about your emotion and how you're feeling and how you work with that. And so those are all different elements of the same story, really. But how do you give your leaders a tool so that they know, okay, this is the moment in which you use the highly emotional story. This is the moment in which you use the highly visionary story. Maybe this is the moment that you use the professor story, which is highly logical story for this audience, for this situation, for this type of message, right? So you have a decoder, basically, for your leaders so that they can know situationally which story to tell. These are old slides. So I want to summarize quickly what the different types are. You saw a demo of some of the types. In my class, we dig into all of the types and all of the demos of the different types. But I want to give you an overview so you can already start using this tool yourself. I'll give you examples of people that you can think about when you think about each of these different types. So the evangelists, the very, very emotional, very passionate, very in your face. You notice I lean into the camera. You'll find people use their hands a lot. They tend to be very emotive. People who are this type as a default are very emotive. So you have Tony Robbins, you have Pat Robbins. They might be really large. They're larger than life. They walk into a room. They seem to take up more space. That's an evangelist. And you find a lot of salespeople and marketing people because people tend to self-sort themselves into different careers. You find a lot of sales and marketing people who like to, you'll find a lot of evangelists, rather, who like to work in sales and marketing because it takes that type of personality and it makes that personality successful. So they want to go there. Not to say they're all that way, but you will find a higher concentration of evangelists in these roles. Now, sage. Sage is also emotional, but they're very different. They're very empathetic. They like to connect with the other person. And they like to understand their life story. What's happening with you today? They might say in the hallway, right? They are the people who remembers the personal crises that other people have in the company. They'll ask about, oh, how is your family? How is your mother? How is your daughter today? I heard about this. What is happening there? How can I be helpful to you? Those are the sages in your life and in your company. And some of the examples are Oprah, right? Gandalf in a fictional character. In Friends, which is a sitcom that I like to watch, Rachel is more of a sage personality. And in this role, you get a lot of HR. In this storyteller type, a lot of them gravitate towards HR, gravitate towards design, because these are the roles that aren't, outspoken emotional, if you will, but much more internal and connecting and empathy type of emotional. And so you find a lot of sages there. Then you have the happy, wise neighbor who's, both emotional and logical, but starting from the emotional side. Rather, they'll make an argument starting on the emotional end and then connect out to the logical. They're really easygoing. They have a lot of friends. They're more about being with the community. That's what's important for them. And they're people like Melissa McCarthy, George W., like very easy to relate to for most people. And some of the common roles that they end up gravitating towards would be in product roles or marketing roles. Those roles which require people to talk to evangelists, talk to professors, being able to talk to everybody in the spectrum and relate with them because they're themselves very easygoing and friendly. And the visionary is the other side of the same coin as your wise neighbor. Now, this person comes in from the logical side. So if they're giving a presentation, they're going to be about a big number on the screen. And then they'll explain that number, like 8,000. What does 8,000 mean? Then they'll explain that 8,000 is the number of X in Y, right? They'll explain it in a way that really makes sense and connects with you. That's a visionary, right? Someone who can take logical, break it down and make it emotional. People like Steve Jobs are really good at this. Sheryl Sandberg's good at this. They connect the emotion with the logical world. And a lot of company, especially in Silicon Valley where I'm from, a lot of head of companies, CEOs are in this particular storyteller type, not because only the storyteller type is fit for that role, but because it's celebrated for this role, especially in Silicon Valley. Not necessarily so outside, right? There's a big lean towards a visionary type of leader in Silicon Valley, but different other leaders in different cultural settings. So you'll notice that in different countries, actually, that they favor a different kind of leader, a different kind of storyteller. And for CEOs who are good at flexing their storytelling type to all the different kinds, they can thrive everywhere. But the ones who are strongly one type would thrive particularly in one place. And that's a CEO, any leader, really. So for them to understand, for your leaders to understand, oh, this is my default type. This is the place where I can thrive. And where I am right now, this might be the preferred type or it might not be the preferred type. So how do I flex my storytelling in order to connect with my audience? So a lot of people who work with the range, who work from evangelist all the way to professor as part of their job, that's product, that's CEOs, right? They have to work across silos. They end up being in the middle because over time they've trained themselves to be better at those storyteller types. Now the truth teller. Truth teller is straight to the point. They like to just tell you how it is, right? And I love working with Israelis, and I find that a lot of them actually fit this profile, and maybe Russians as well, right? They like to go straight to the point, very logical, like this is how it is, right? The fact is this. The fact is that you did a poor job here, right? They'll go straight to the point. There's some examples here, Mark Maron, George Carlin, a lot of stand-up comedies are this way. And the reason they're successful, for this storyteller type to be successful, is to be able to bring humor into it. And again, this is a cultural difference. There's a huge cultural difference here where some cultures are more accepting of this type of leader and appreciate the style more, in which case they're more okay with a less funny truth teller, right? Because they're more okay with just hearing the dry truth. In a culture where this is less accepted, the truth teller becomes successful when they can bring in more humor. This is why I use the jester hat. You see, there's a jester hat for the truth teller because the jester traditionally in the court in the palace is doing a similar role where they're bringing truth to power, to the king, and being able to make it funny. So then the king, the power, doesn't feel like, oh, they're offending me. They're just making a joke. right? And the interesting thing about truth-teller is they don't tend to be in a specific role. I do find them all over the map, actually, probably because they're different acceptance in different cultures for truth-tellers, and they're actually a smaller part of the total population, and so they are everywhere. But a truth-teller deployed in the right moment, especially in company pivot moments where the truth really needs to be tackled head on because the company is struggling and we need to just own up to the truth, being able to deploy a truth teller to tell the story in that moment is really powerful. So right now, we talked a little bit about how having your leaders have this toolbox of different types is helpful to help them personally. And now I'm talking about how if you are a cultural leader for a group and you're trying to cultivate your leaders to become better storytellers, something you can personally do right away is also curate, right? What I mean is if you think that in this moment the company needs a visionary storyteller and you know of your 10 leaders which one is the visionary, you can pluck that person and say, hey, I want you to give the talk today to the people, to motivate them, have the visionary do it, then they'll naturally do it in that way. Or in the moment the company needs a truth teller, you can pull the truth teller leader and have that person give the talk for the company. So as a curator of your presentations or of your cultural story, you also have some control over which person you can leverage. So you can use these tools in two different ways, which is build up your individual leaders so they're more flexible, but also for you as a curator to be able to bring in the right leader for the right story, for the right moment. And now the professor, right? Very logical. They'll come in with the numbers. A professor will bring the charts every time. They'll have a spreadsheet ready behind them because for them, the world is seen through the lens of logic. And if it's not logical, why would you touch it? It's drastically different from the evangelists, where for them, emotion is reality. They want to see your face. They want to shake your hand. An evangelist wants to know you and how you're responding emotionally to a situation. That is the data, if you will, that they're taking in and believing. Whereas your professor, they want to see the numbers before they'll believe. If you have a slide deck with no numbers in it, all pictures, your professor is not sold. If you have a presenter who all they talk about, like the one brick at a time, right? If all I talk about is the emotion behind that, they're not going to relate to it. They want to see examples of how one brick at a time has succeeded in the past, number of companies who use this mantra, and how it helped them succeed. Then they're convinced that this mantra works, right? To have a very extreme example. The common roles that professors like to go into are also the very logical roles that require a lot of logical understanding, like engineering, finance. A professor can be very compelling. Very compelling. You're Neil deGrasse Tyson. Very compelling. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, extremely professor, but very compelling because they have this interested energy. I mean, think back on a professor or a teacher that really inspires you. That's why I use this name for this logical type, because they inspire you with their interest in the topic. They're like, oh, isn't this so exciting? Made this discovery within the data and it's so exciting. So if you unlock the professor in their element and you put them in front of professors, you'll find they're extremely compelling as well. So every single storyteller type is extremely compelling in their own way. And when people are able to stretch into other ways, they connect with their audience very automatically. So then the question is, how do you leverage all the cultural storytellers in your company, all the leaders, to better tell the story and give them the tools to do this? Yeah, we got 10 minutes. We're actually getting to the end here for Q&A. These are some of the companies whose people have taken my class and worked with this framework to help them become better storytellers. And it's become very powerful for these leaders to be able to use a framework and a tool to quickly get to stories. It's all about speed. And when you're a leader, you tell a lot of stories every day. So what is the go-to framework for them to quickly put in okay, what am I trying to accomplish? And then create a story that makes sense for that situation. So I'm going to recap. What did we learn today? Senior leaders, your senior leaders, need tools to become better storytellers. And your cultural stories need to resonate with all of your employees, knowing that all of your employees will be spread amongst 6 different types of storytellers. So they're looking for the stories that resonate with them. And by understanding the 6 stories framework, your leaders can have a shared language to create these stories. So I invite you to share the quiz with your other leaders. Feel free to use that tool. It's free. And you can understand how your different leaders are telling stories, how they can better tell stories, how they can stretch from where they are right now. I'd love to connect with you. We're into questions now, so feel free to start typing your questions here. Feel free to connect with me. I'd love to connect with you. I teach individual storytelling classes. I have a next class that starts September. This is great, especially if you have a training program for your employees. They can just take the class as an individual and learn these frameworks, etc., and bring it back into the company and use it in their work. If you have a team who wants to have this shared language, the most powerful is when people have a shared language that they can use, especially in settings where they're telling a story as a team. Like if you have a presentation where more than one person in the team is giving the presentation together, then they can use this framework also to line up their stories. In addition, they can also use this framework to better curate a all hands or a cultural presentation. And for teams and orgs, my next available team session would be in September. So feel free to reach out to me and ask about that if you're interested. And I also coach C-suites on both stories, but also on product management because that's my background. Really had a great time today sharing my framework with you and sharing some of my learnings with you on this framework. One last tidbit that I haven't shared yet. See the colors on the bottom, the rainbow on the bottom of the slide. That's actually the chart of the different types of storytellers there are. So, you know, the thousands of people who took this quiz, Evangelists is a small percentage, and sages, wise neighbor, there's lots of wise neighbors out there. Many visionaries out there. Truth teller is smaller, and then professor is smaller as well. This heavily leans towards a lot of CEOs, which I give this talk to, as well as product leaders that take my class. So there is a higher ratio of wise neighbor and visionary as a result. But you can see how they're distributed here. So that's what the rainbow is about.
I love the additional meaning that is assigned to the rainbow. Bravo. Lovely.
Yes.
Connie, what a lovely presentation. I left your links in the chat, so let me just drop down the slides. And you can see people are really excited about. We have Tatiana's question for you. Is it possible to shift between roles, for example, between emotional evangelist and specific visionary?
Yes. Yes. That is exactly what we're giving leaders the tools to do, is you are born a certain way, and then over time you learn all the different kinds. And for leaders who had a lot of opportunity to work with different people, they learn different styles and they naturally adopt the different styles, right? They may read your energy when they walk into a room and connect with you. If you're sitting down, they sit down next to you. If you're standing up, they stay standing with you, right? Those are all subtle changes to your storyteller type that people are doing naturally if they have a lot of experience working with people. But we take that and we turn it into more of a science. So that's more of an art, and we make it more visible. So we have a framework, and people can use that to be like, oh, consciously make these decisions about how you connect with people, both, you know, from a body language perspective, your voice, as well as the content that you say. So it really runs through everything. And yes, so the answer is yes. You learn to vary from one. Say, I am visionary. So you saw me doing Evangelists, right? I've learned to vary my style, and it's very hard. It takes work, but as I practice more, it gets better. And I start understanding, oh, this is the way I relate to a person who is from that storyteller type. Yeah, it's very powerful when you can start doing it. And it takes practice, and it takes tools, and it takes understanding. So that's the point of this framework. Thanks for asking that question.
Awesome. Tatiana, hope you received your answer there. And, I had one question. Tatiana meant, Tatiana meant not between the roles, but inside one story. Could you shift? Or is it like you tell one story from one perspective? What's your advice?
Inside the one story. Good question as well. Yes, you do shift, and you can shift from different sections of the story. So let's say you're giving one long talk to motivate your team. You do want to connect with every person in the audience, right? There's 6 different types. So you do some shifts. Now, you don't do it super quickly, right? You might have sections, and keeping in mind that there's certain elements that you can do. We talk about 5 different elements when we go deep, and we talk about 5 different elements. So they're kind of the dials that you have. If you move a certain dial, you can connect with more than one storyteller type at once. So we encourage using some of those dials to connect with multiple storyteller types at once. But yes, the answer is yes, you do actually vary. And in fact, in one of my demonstration for Sage, it's a different one where I talk about selling frozen yogurt. In that one, my Sage switches a bit to Evangelist at the end because it was a sales pitch. But it started very Sage. It started like, I'm connecting with you, very personal, but then I'm selling something at the end, right? So it switches to Evangelist at the end, but it allows me to make that connection with the person to start with. So you often see that happening, and it's totally fine because then you actually connect with more people in your audience. So yes.
Awesome.
Great question.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. There's a continuation question. Is there any studies about which type of stories land the best, or if I suppose correctly, it lands depending on the audience?
Which of the stories land the best?
Lands with the audience, like use Sage because Sage is the best, or there's no studies about that.
Yeah, so it's very situational, and based on the study that informal study, right, through working with thousands of people using this framework, it's extremely situational. And not only can you use this framework for people, leaders telling stories, you can also use it for brands, telling a story about their brand. And each brand tends to have, or strong brands tend to have, a specific brand identity that follows one of the storyteller type. I'm going into kind of the weeds right now, the details that we do go through in the class. But to zoom back up, right, it's going to be situational. Depends on your audience. That's number one. And then depends a bit on your brand. If you're talking about your brand, if that's the story, then you may be constrained by the type that your brand is. And then you may be a bit constrained by your own ability to stretch, right? Like if you are one very strong storyteller type and you're not comfortable yet stretching to another one, you might start with that type. So there's a lot of variations that contribute to which type you would end up using. And the question was, is one type stronger than the other? And the answer is no. They're all very strong types. I gave you examples of the different humans, different leaders, general, pop icons who are the different types. So you see, like, we have people rising to the highest ranks of their profession from different types. So I wouldn't say that one particular, it's the same question as like, is there a particular leadership style that is preferred? And it depends on culture. It depends on the followers. It depends on the situation, right? So yeah, it really depends. But that's why being able to flex and being able to read the situation and having tools for that is so critical.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bonnie, it was lovely listening to you and exploring our 6 types. I'm going to refer to that test in your website also, often, I guess. And we still have one question from Sergey in the chat, but just to follow in that time, I would like to ask you to respond to Sergey in chat. And before I let you go, I have a traditional question to every speaker that I want your opinion on. So a culture forms the stories we live and tell, but stories at the same time form the culture we live in. So what came first in your opinion, culture or stories?
Aha, chicken and egg. Mm,
It's a tricky one.
that's a tough one. That's a tough one. They're interrelated.
Yeah, I know, but we're
I think they
keeping,
both happened at the same
we're
time.
keeping score here, so
I think it happens at the same time.
that's true. But
It's like the Schrodinger cat. It's like the Schrodinger cat. You don't. It's happening at the same time. Both are true. And then if you look at it, then it'll be one of them will be true, right?
But if
That's
you
what's
had
happening.
to choose, I mean, for the sake of the score, it's not like an exam, but I would just want your opinion.
For the sake of the score.
Yeah.
I see. That's what we're giving here. Okay. Well, as a storyteller, then I would say stories come first.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right.
Irene is writing that
Thank you.
she got so many brilliant ideas, and I totally agree with that. Thank you so much for joining and for being here, especially this year. You're awesome.
Thanks for having me.